What's important here is that you're listening to yourself. Even if you just put in your AirPods or like earbuds with a wire, whatever it is, just make sure that you take the time to listen to yourself. When I sat down here at the table, all of my settings were wrong. My setup at home is very different. So if I hadn't had plugged in my headphones and listened to it, there's a chance that I wouldn't even be sending you audio right now. If you want good sound, you got to listen to it and make sure you're getting good sound.
This is On Camera, On Brand, a show for professionals who want to look good on camera, but don't have the time or expertise to turn their office into a Hollywood studio. In each episode, Rob Rusher uncovers how professionals can get the most from their home or office setups. If you invest the time to share your stories on camera, you should be on brand.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of On Camera, On Brand. I'm your host, Rob Rusher, and today we are actually in my dining room with a good friend of mine, Kyle Hupman. Kyle, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude, of course. And probably most of you listening to the show don't know who Kyle is, and Kyle is an amazing field sound recordist. I don't know if that's the correct term, but I know Kyle works on the shows, movies, commercials. We've been on a lot of shoots together. Maybe it's easier, Kyle. Why don't you say what you do day to day on set?
Yeah, so the technical term I go by is production sound mixer. I will get calls from random production companies around the city. They'll have me bring a selection of equipment out to wherever they're shooting. Sometimes it's a grocery store, sometimes it's a house, sometimes it could be anywhere really. And I'll have a selection of wired and wireless microphones with me that I'll use to record dialogue and random bits of audio throughout the day.
Nice. So what are some of the most common problems you run into when recording sound, let's say even in an office environment?
So one of the biggest things that I run into all the time is in the summer, you're dealing with air conditioners, and in the winter, you're dealing with heaters. It's hard to get through a project without some form of climate control. You can start to either see people sweat, you can see them shiver, and a lot of times you don't want that. So even though the optimal way to record audio is to turn all of that stuff off, you can't. You got to keep people comfortable too. It's all about a balance.
No, that's interesting. And what about being at home? What are some of the common things for a lot of people maybe listening? They're doing either they're creating content at home or they're recording podcasts at home like we are, or just doing their everyday Zoom calls and virtual meetings.
Yeah, so in the home, you also have some heating and cooling problems, but a lot of times you'll be dealing with traffic passing by your house. So I have a studio in my attic and I like to sit by the window. The problem is the window lets a lot of sound through, even when it's closed. If I had a solid wall or even like a soundproofed wall, I would be in a much better recording environment, but it would also be a cave, and I don't want to be stuck in that all day. So instead of putting myself in a box, I will use different techniques to reduce the traffic noise and reduce the amount of room echo and just all the different bad sounds per se. Just have a different selection of techniques that I think we're going to go over today.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say that's a perfect segue. So in this episode, I think, environment is such a big thing. And I know when we talked earlier, you mentioned that a lot. So we're just going to save that for another episode. So we'll just assume wherever you're recording, it's where you are now and you can't do much about it. And then we'll save another episode where we can dive into whether you're building a studio space or you're just had it with the outside noise, maybe some ways if you can invest a little money to upgrade that. But for now, just going with what you have, maybe people are searching for gear. What is the most important thing? If I'm recording a podcast, what is the most important thing? Is it the microphone, USB interface? What should I be investing in at first?
As a sound person, I love to talk about gear, and it's very easy to start rattling off all the expensive this and that could be used, and what's the best this, what's the best that. Really what it comes down to is the preamp of your microphone. So I'm using it's called the MixPre 3. I kind of get a good shot of it. You can see the bars moving as I'm talking. This is a little recording device that also works as a USB interface. And the reason I like this device is it has really nice preamps. Now, what a preamp does is it sends power to your microphone and it also receives the signal and helps convert it into a signal that your digital recorder can understand. So if you're recording and you're hearing the hiss, I guess we'll call it the white noise, that sort of like sound that you sometimes get when you turn things up loud, that's from the preamps. If you have a lower budget preamp, you will start to notice that the noise floor will come in a lot sooner. Whereas if you have a higher budget preamp, you'll be able to turn your microphone up a lot higher without noticing any of that white noise.
Okay, so the preamp is basically more or less the digital noise floor. So if I have a good preamp, I can push that gain up, meaning like the microphone can be far away from my face. I mean, I can already hear the difference just moving this an inch, which I'm sure we're going to get into next is the placement. So that's basically what that is. It could more or less, I could push a microphone a little farther away from my face, turn up the gain on the preamp, and still get a clean sound.
Yeah, and for me to say that the preamp is the most important piece of the puzzle isn't necessarily accurate. It's going to be everything kind of working together. If you have, a $2,000 microphone and a cheap preamp, it's going to kind of sound as good as the preamp can sound. And the flip side is, if you have a great preamp but a cheap microphone, you're only going to get as good sound as the microphone can create. It's finding the balance of the two that I think is affordable and works for you.
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, clearly it is about the positioning. Anyone that's recorded sound, has recorded a podcast, knows the difference when they're pointed in the right direction. Even when they turn to talk at their computer, you can hear a huge difference, of that. So you have the Shure microphone, which seems to be one of the most popular. I'm using a Rode Broadcaster. I think Podcaster even is the version of this. So dynamic cardioids, where do we put these to get the best sound?
So right now, you and I both have microphones that are meant to be close. We're meant to be speaking right into them. And if we get too far away, you immediately start to lose a lot of the quality. You start to lose a lot of the different frequencies that make your voice sound good. So for mic positioning, it really comes down to the type of microphone you have. And without going into the specifics of cardioid, hypercardioid, like all that, you can kind of tell based off the microphone's shape. These, we can see that these are sort of like the podcaster microphones. A lot of people use the Shure SM7B. I believe this was the Michael Jackson microphone. I think that's what made it famous. But really what it comes down to is if you have a decent microphone and you're close to it, it's probably going to sound pretty good, So for my line of work, I often use longer range shotgun microphones. That allows me to be 2 or 3 feet away from a person talking and still get a good sound. Whereas something like this, I would never bring to my work environment because the microphones aren't allowed to be on camera. All of my microphones have to be outside of the camera frame or hidden under clothes, and you can't really get away with something like this.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people are finding the value in not just having an audio podcast, but recording it like we are, so you can use it for, other pieces of content and grow your audience and just put it on different channels. So I guess, honestly, my question is, what do you recommend? So, the microphone's not blocking my face from camera. It has a clear shot, but I'm still getting great sound. And I know we brought some other microphones, too, to kind of hear the difference. So whenever you want to get into that, you can also. All the toys on the table, Kyle, are now open for us to mess around with.
Cool, great. Well, let's keep going with the microphones we have up for the moment.
Okay.
So I chose to put this microphone kind of off to the side of me based off of where the camera is. The camera is on my left. The microphone is on my right. If I had, everything flipped, the microphone would kind of be here maybe, and it might be blocking me. And I don't really want that, If I was in a studio recording music or recording voiceover or something like that, I would want to be directly at the microphone with probably some sort of pop filter screen in front of me to just help prevent that sound you get. I have a pretty hefty windshield on this microphone, so that helps a lot. That allows me to get right up next to it and just kind of talk to it, which is something to keep in mind too, is that if you're giving a presentation and you're unable to record your audio, sometimes you might be getting, let's see if I can replicate it here. So now if I exhale or get too close, start saying words with P's in them, you'll start to hear that popping essentially that overloads the diaphragm of the microphone and just creates like a low bass hit that we don't want to hear.
So that's just there's a pop filter. And so is that screen, is it just like kind of almost deadening that initial hit that the microphone's picking up?
Yeah, so this is like probably about a half inch of foam, and all it does is slow down the wind coming out of my mouth so that it doesn't hit the diaphragm. So the sound will go through, the physical wind will not. And you can get fuzzy microphone covers too. I'm sure a lot of people have seen those that really knock back wind.
Yeah, and I've seen those you use on set. Those you use to even cut the wind noise out. So anyone that's recorded outside knows what it sounds like when the wind hits a microphone. That's basically what you're talking about here, right?
Yeah, you'll see it in a lot of podcasts behind the scenes where they'll go out into the field with their audio recorder and they'll have this big fuzzy Zeppelin is what we call it. And it's usually gray and it's all fuzzy and they'll, be pointing it at whatever. The microphone itself is very tiny inside, but they create a gap around the microphone of air. And then there's a shield with a mesh around it. And then that has the fur around it. And together it creates a nice environment for the microphone to pick up all the frequencies it needs to without getting blasted by wind or breath.
Nice. Nice. Well, hopefully we don't need that here in the dining room.
Yeah. Something like this is, plenty. And I mean, your microphone doesn't even have a windshield on it. And I'm sure, it sounds fine, Really, a lot of it comes down to the individual pieces of equipment, how you're using them, how they're placed.
Yeah, and I think this one, they advertise that they kind of have a built-in, there's some filter in here between the mesh you see and where it actually starts picking up the
Okay.
sound.
Yeah. I mean, there could just be, there could be some of this foam under the mesh. Like that could be as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what about, so you're saying if you're looking directly at camera, let's say that's a lot of people, that's kind of what they're doing. So it's almost like you want to get in front of you, but obviously I don't want to block my entire face. So is the goal just kind of getting it as close to your face as you can with?
Generally, I say, so what I like to think is that imagine the person who's talking, which in this case is us. Imagine I'm holding a balloon or a basketball in front of my mouth. That's sort of the zone, like right here is the zone that I want to be able to point my microphone at. So in this instance, I have the microphone off to the side, but I'm still pointing it at my mouth. If it was in front of me, like if I move it over, I would need to turn the microphone, which my cable's hitting, so I can't, and it kind of gets all wonky once you try to change the settings on camera. But I think if someone were to use one of these microphones and the idea was to speak directly to camera, they would almost want it lower and right in front of them. You'll see that look a lot on YouTube.
And so are you almost like speaking over the microphone a little bit? I guess you're still trying to like angle it. So if I was looking straight at you, I'm trying to see where it sounds. Yeah, I feel like I'd still have to be about here to sound pretty good.
Yeah, so I think you have a pretty good selection right there for where you want your microphone to be, if it's going to be directly in front of you. However, for the most part, you should be able to go 20, 30 degrees off to the side and not really have to worry. If I start to get too far over here, you really start to lose me. If I go past the edge of my mouth because my sound projects out, you lose it over here when you start to pick it back up in front of you. So that's something to keep in mind too. And to check that, all you have to do is put on some headphones and start talking into your mic. It's the classic, like check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. You can already hear that this is a much better placement than somewhere else over here.
Yeah. Or the famous on set, tell me what you had for breakfast.
Right. Yeah. I
You
use
can
that
just
one a
ramble
lot. And
about
people
it
look
and-
at me like I'm crazy. And then a lot of people don't eat breakfast. I've learned that from doing sound.
I
all
know
these years.
that question sometimes is worse than just saying check 1, 2. I
Right.
feel. Okay, so, and actually it's funny, I feel like where I moved it, where you told me, I actually heard more of the wind blowing there, and I kind of have to dial down the gain just a
Okay.
little bit. That's crazy how almost sensitive, I guess, is a good way to put it.
And something to think about too is by moving the microphone directly in front of you, you are now in line with your nose. So when you exhale through your nose is going to create wind, and that's going to go down on your microphone. Where if you move it up just a little bit, now when I breathe out through my nose, the air is going down past the microphone and it's not blowing on it.
That's a great dang, Kyle. That's a great tip.
And
Because that happens sometimes, and sometimes you're not thinking about it, or sometimes I just like when I'm listening to you, I'll like consciously close my mouth, so I'm not just sitting here with my like mouth open, and then all of a sudden you start like breathing out of your nose. I don't think is the best sound that you want.
yeah, and with headphones on too, sometimes it's easy to lose track of what you sound like in the room. I've caught myself a few times at work while I have my headphones on. I'll be listening to 5 or 6 people talk, and I'll be breathing through my mouth really loud because I won't realize that I'm doing it.
That's smart. Yeah, that's a good thing to think about. Okay, so for these microphones, the typical podcast broadcaster microphones, just as close as you can get it in front of your face, and if you can, try to even go up a little bit so when you're breathing out of your nose, you don't get that hit of wind in the microphone.
Yeah, always just be open to playing around with different positions. There's going to be people who are going to tell you there's a certain way to do it. And it's always good to listen to what they have to say, but don't be afraid to experiment. Like innovation comes from mistakes getting corrected. And to always do what everybody says is the right way to do it isn't necessarily going to create the best way for you.
Yeah, or get the results you're looking for even. And that's one thing too. And before we get into the next microphones and kind of compare, because the next thing I want to talk about is like, let's say I'm doing some sales meetings and I want to just really connect with someone on camera, or it's some kind of conference where I'm trying to connect with multiple people. I'd love to not have any microphone, kind of have the shotgun boom, but just going almost thinking how you're saying the placement is so important. It almost seems like if I were just kind of before we move on to the next items, if I have a little bit of a budget, it almost seems like part of that budget should be spent into how to adjust the microphone. And just if people are only listening to this, they're not watching the video portion, the way Kyle and I have been moving these microphones instantly and to precisely get the microphone is with these nice arms. And there's a range of different arms and mounts, but I went with the arm and I went with the brand name Rode because I knew the importance of getting something exactly where I need it and it not moving and not, the arm failing. So I don't know if you have any quick things on different arms or pieces like that you've used.
Yeah, so what's pretty standard is just sort of the tabletop microphone. It's like a weighted circle with a screw on the top that you put your microphone on. That's kind of what you see a lot with presentations. Sometimes they'll come with microphones depending on what you're getting, or if you get like a USB microphone, chances are it'll have one built in. That's all fine. There's nothing wrong with having a tabletop microphone, but you will be subject to probably having it on camera, probably having it below you, sort of in that like nose wind range per se. I think I have the same model that you do, maybe one model different or something, but it's an articulating arm. There's 3 access points. It just clamps to the table. It's super simple. I think there were options with mine too. I don't remember what they were to mount it. I think I could have screwed it directly in if I wanted to. And then there's just a couple of different locks, so you can move it over here. I can bring it down, just kind of get it set up to where it's comfortable and in an optimal sounding zone that's also not blocking my face on camera.
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's especially if you're recording sound to be on video, even if you're okay with the microphone in, it's like each setup, even myself, every time it's just a little different. The camera's just a little slightly positioned different, and being able to in seconds just get the mic where I want it and go versus like rigging multiple arms and stuff like that. I feel like I don't think I would record as much as I do.
And, like you don't want to have to be stuck. Like I can only sit here and, like if I move, all of a sudden I'm off axis or whatever, you want to have the freedom, and these arms kind of give us the freedom. Now, one thing you were saying before is, your presentation, or at least like the way you present on camera, you might not want the podcast look when you're giving a presentation to somebody, there's a time and a place for it, I think. And if you are in a position where you don't want to have headphones on and you don't want to have the microphone in front of you, you got to do something different. And there are solutions for that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll start with the audio solutions. We have it's off camera, but I have using Elgato's master mounts and multi mounts. I have kind of a boom mic, so the similar microphone that Kyle says he uses, just trust me, not nearly as expensive as the ones you buy. It's a Sennheiser. I think it's the SKE 600, which is just kind of your standard, you know, all-purpose cardioid microphone. So yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
It's a very affordable setup. A lot of the stuff that I have at work, I wouldn't recommend to somebody for a situation like this because there's no reason to spend $2,000 on a microphone for your web broadcast. There are plenty of things in the, $100, couple $100 world that are going to work great. And those are the things that I want to lead people towards.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like the investment should be if you don't have several $100s to get, very professional and everything. It seems like get a good enough microphone with a way to get it exactly where it needs to be and a decent enough preamp, and that should get you really in a good spot.
Right. Yeah. So I think those are probably the two things to think about when you want to create a plan to sound better on your web broadcast is what is my preamp? Another way to say that is, how am I getting my signal via USB into my laptop? Because that's generally what you're going to have to do. Now, there's plenty of microphones out there that are USB microphones now, where they'll have the preamp built into the microphone. It's all kind of a plug and play thing. You take a USB cord straight into your laptop, change a setting on the laptop, and you're good to go. And while we don't have any of those here today, I would highly recommend looking into those when you are putting together your future web broadcast setup.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of those too. Whenever someone asks me or we're talking about audio gear wise, I always say, "Well, do you think you're going to use any of this like away from your computer, right? Like, do you really just plan on doing the video podcast? That's great. Or if you're a content creator, you're someone that might want to get hired and go do some interviews, or maybe you work for a company full time and you're going to events and grabbing footage. It might be worth getting the XLR because now you could use it for both, if you did get some kind of shotgun microphone. But
Yeah, if you're in a position where, you're not doing strictly web broadcast or you're not planning to always have, your microphone connected to your laptop, it does make a lot of sense to get an XLR fed microphone just because it's a lot more versatile.
yeah, it is funny seeing some of the people that just will hate on the microphone. It's USB, it can't be as good. But then you listen to it, it's like, well, what do you mean it can't be that good? It's a well-made microphone. Like computers are getting better, I think, if you get in the right place. So yeah, don't let the haters discourage you.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind too is, how is your audience listening to you? If they're on some cheap laptop speakers, it doesn't matter how good your setup is, you're going to sound like a cheap laptop. I know plenty of friends with phones that have speakers that are just blown out on them. And, so it's like no matter what you do, you're not going to sound good on their phone. I was actually at work one time and one of the production assistants was showing me a commercial we had worked on the month before, and her phone speakers were all blown out. So I'm standing there listening to this commercial we did, thinking to myself, like, oh no, like this sounds awful. And I had to go find somebody else on set to have them show me the clip on their laptop so that I could hear it. And then it sounded good, but stuff like that, it's out of my control.
I can see you kind of freaking out in your head. I've been there before where I've been at a bar and I've seen a commercial and I'm just like, oh God. And I've like had to go on my phone. I'm like, let me just look at this real quick to make sure it's like these TVs and not like what I did.
Exactly. And like AirPods, they're getting really good. Bluetooth is very limited to how much data they can transfer over at once, and because AirPods are sending and receiving, they really have to limit the amount of audio that you're getting through them. So if, the person listening to you is on AirPods, they're going to be hearing like a pretty low quality sound by the time it gets to them. So that's kind of why for this web broadcast situation, I don't really recommend going for the multi-$1,000 setups. It's like find a couple $100s and figure out how you want to spend it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just to almost wrap up the monitoring, it's a big reason I invested into nicer headphones, for at least for myself and the work I'm doing. I'm very comfortable wearing these headphones on every call all day. So like, yeah, I just wanted to research what is like the cleanest sound I can get and something that, hours and hours a day are comfortable. But it does seem like any headphone you plug in for this type of work, I don't know. I mean, seems like the ones you're wearing, the Sony ones, I have those. I've had them for a million years. I think they're only like $80 or $90. And, if you're looking for headphones, I'll put a link in there. But I would say that's like as far as the cheapest professional set that will last you years and years and years, I mean, unless you know of anything else better in that price range.
There are plenty of options. A lot of it comes down to comfort. A lot of it depends on if you're using them to specifically record audio, if they're kind of like a set of headphones you keep by your computer for web conferences, or, if it's something you want to listen to music on, or if you want like a combination of all of it. I would not recommend these for a day-to-day use, but in the studio, I recommend them 100%. I've had this set for 8 years now. I've replaced the pads a few times because they wear out, but that's just part of owning them for so long, is that you have to. But they still sound great. And at this point, my ears are trained to what these headphones sound like. So I kind of have to keep using them, because if I switch headphones, one of my main microphones might sound different to me, and I won't have changed anything with the microphone, but because I'm on different headphones, it might sound wrong. So for me,
I never knew that. I never would have thought that, actually.
yeah, after you do it for a few years, you start to become sensitive to this kind of thing. But the Sony MDR 7506 is what I'm using, and I highly recommend them. But if you don't want to spend $80 on a pair of headphones, you don't need to. What's important here is that you're listening to yourself. Even if you just put in your AirPods or like whatever, just, earbuds with a wire, whatever it is, just make sure that you take the time to listen to yourself. When I sat down here at the table, all of my settings were wrong because I had to change everything for the software we're using to record and to project. My setup at home is very different. So if I hadn't had plugged in my headphones and listened to it, there's a chance that I wouldn't even be sending you audio right now. It's like I have the green bars to go off of, but that can only do you so much. If you want good sound, you got to listen to it and make sure you're getting good sound.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I'd even say a step further, if you're doing any type of like Zoom calls online with people that are responding, any headphones are better than none, because you're going to get some reverb, and you can try the echo cancellations, but obviously you're just asking for more issues. It would solve some problems too.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of the programs now, especially because of the pandemic, we all got very used to video chats, and the available programs and technology for online video chatting has gotten a lot better. And because of that, I feel as though the ability of like, Zoom to even cancel, just like turn off who's talking, send the sound through, and like just the ability of like the software to do that now has gotten so good. But at the end of the day, if you're wearing headphones and you can constantly have a feed of who's talking to you, you're going to have a faster response time and a better understanding of what they're saying.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Okay, so we got these mics, got some headphones, chat. So now I think it's time. I would love to let you check out the microphones I have going on and help me set this up. So like I said before, this is just a shotgun mount that's connected to like an Elgato arm system. So basically, you don't see it, and that's the whole point. I have it armed up and over, around the camera. So how do I get the best sound of this microphone, and where do I start?
So with a longer shotgun microphone like we're about to use, generally I try to position it above the mouth. Same thing I was talking about before, pretend that your person, like you have a balloon or a basketball or a grapefruit in their mouth, and that's where you want to point the microphone. So this sort of like bubble in front of me, I guess.
I'm going to go ahead and switch. Right now you're hearing me from the Rode Podcaster mic, or Procaster mic, I'm sorry. And now you're hearing me from, wow, and I can already hear the noise difference on this.
Yeah, and a big part of that at the moment is placement. You're kind of off to the side. It's not quite tilted at your mouth. So what I would recommend for a microphone like this, the first thing you're going to want to do is center it above you. So the idea is that, it's right above your nose. Like if your eyes look straight up.
It right to camera, I can get it closer. Because this
Okay,
arm,
yeah, I like that.
unfortunately, I didn't get it. I don't have the full arm extension. I thought this would be enough. And I do have a boom pole that gets it, but
that's okay though, because I feel like
Okay.
part of this experience is wanting to know what this is like looking directly down the pipe, looking directly at the camera. That's kind
yeah,
of
that's true. Well, I'll tell you right now, I don't think I would ever use this mic if I had someone sitting across, because I can already hear so much more I can hear you so much through this.
Yeah, and that's just the nature of this type of microphone, like the podcaster microphones that we're using will pick up sound that is close to the microphone. The idea is that you want your source to be super close, whereas the shotgun microphone that we're working on now can reach a lot farther. So, the disadvantage of the shotgun microphone is that it lets in a lot more outside sound, pretty much everything around you, everything behind you is now subject to get picked up by that microphone. The advantage is that we no longer see it, because you're not using the podcaster microphone anymore. So you can keep it off and it gives
But you can hear
you,
everything on the desk. Sorry for doing that while you were talking, but I think that's a great example.
but see, I'm
It's
still
the
on the
first time I
podcast.
heard anything on this table. You can hear everything.
Yeah, you're probably picking up everything now too, and because I'm still on the podcast microphone, I'm not really getting it over here, but you're getting a ton of it over there, and you're probably getting some of me too.
Yeah.
The advantage of this microphone is that you now have more movement. You'll get probably an additional 6 inches left, 6 inches right, maybe even back and forth. So you're not stuck to being talking directly into the microphone. And, if you position it like we have, where on my phone, like BTS cam, you can see that it's right above you, but on your camera setup, we can't see it anymore. We can still hear you, can't see it. If we hadn't had been speaking into the podcast microphones before, you wouldn't necessarily have the side-by-side comparison, and it probably would sound a lot better to you.
Yeah, no, it's funny, and hopefully, sorry if that messes up the recording, doing the test, but it is a good test. So, I mean, I'm actually going to just switch back to this microphone and see where, yeah, man, it is funny. I always thought this boom microphone sounded great, and I've used it on big projects and paid things where, if I was even just as like a secondary microphone, it worked fine. But going in this use case of being in my home office or close here, it is crazy the difference of sound. Like, I don't think I really want to use that. It's almost like I'd rather just figure out how to make this look work for what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I mean, in this environment, this type of microphone is what we're going to try to want to make work. This is going to give us that isolated sound, sort of that radio DJ sound where it's like I am speaking directly to you. It's kind of a psychological thing where having a microphone this close to somebody gives it that sort of voiceover. I don't know if omnipotence is the right word. What am I trying to say? Like a God voice, like, you can kind of like, you can feel it in your core. It's like this voice
Yeah,
is
it
speaking to
connects
me.
with you. Like, even myself, on just a solid use case, I was recording some sales pitch videos just instead of an email. I love doing video. I just think it's more powerful in general. I could feel a difference. Like, I was just listening to it, and it's just like, man, it has more power to it. It's almost, there's more weight to the sound.
Exactly, and like these microphones too have a bigger diaphragm, which is the device that picks up the sound. Our voice hits the diaphragm vibrates, the vibrations get turned into electrical signals, and then that all turns into digital, and the magic happens down there. But because these diaphragms are bigger, we're able to get more sound. It's the same thing as like a camera sensor, where your webcam, your cell phone camera might be 4K, but if you go and you get a cinema camera that's 4K, the sensor is going to be so much bigger. It's going to allow more light in, and you're going to get a better picture.
Yeah, no, and I do think there's still a great use for the shotgun mic for myself too, and those at home. I mean, especially, you're right, you can't move with this microphone at all, and I've even noticed that. So any type of gear demo I'm trying to do, or anything more hands-on with someone, even on a one-on-one call, that maybe this microphone will be better. And then I guess the last one I would ask about microphone-wise, now that we've heard these two, is the wireless lav, because that is, out of the ones we've talked, that is the most different, also because it's an omni pattern, correct?
Right. So I brought with me a Sennheiser G3. These are old, but they still work. And the benefit of something like this is you can move around. If you're doing a presentation, I would suggest something like this, because you're not going to be stuck to this microphone. It is going to be stuck to you, and you get to walk around. So I'm going to put it on now. So I have just a little clip. There's this little alligator clip. I'm going to go up through my t-shirt, bring it around, and then just clip it to my collar. Simple as that, And I'm going to switch over to this on my input device. So now I can move away from this microphone, tap on it. You don't hear it anymore. And that's because I'm wearing my microphone. And already you can tell that there's less bass. Because I have it on my shirt, we're still getting some of that presence, but the microphone itself is so much smaller, it just can't grab as much of the frequencies from my voice as a microphone like this can. This is also a much more affordable microphone clip. This is also the stock microphone that came with this lav. And if I wanted to sound better, I could go spend another, $4,000 to $1,000 on a nicer lav wire. There are plenty of upgrades out there. And, if I were working on a high-end commercial job, I probably wouldn't pull something like this. I would pull one of my better microphones. But as you can hear right now, I sound pretty good. And, I can stand up and just kind of walk away, like ditch my headphones. And I can come over to your shot, and
Oh, geez, he's moving. He's on the move.
now I can come hang out
He's
with
on
you,
the move. Yeah.
And because I have this wireless microphone on, I'm not really limited to anything. So if there's a situation, where it feels like you need to be moving around or you're mobile or you just don't want to deal with something like this, the wireless lav could be the solution.
And what about shirt noise and stuff? I mean, to me, sometimes I like, in a lot of ways, I like to see the microphone hidden, but I feel like I wouldn't mind it if everything sounded great too, especially in this kind of use case.
Yeah. So at work, a big part of what I do at work is hiding microphones, so instead of having it up here, I would probably put it right about here.
Like where your sternum is, so where there's a little indent in your chest and you can hide it in your shirt right in there. Okay.
Yeah, and then this particular t-shirt I have on is actually kind of tight, so, I might have a challenge hiding it. The trade-off to hiding a microphone is that you're putting it under clothes. The clothes will naturally remove some of the high-end frequency from your microphone, and you run the risk of having clothing noise.
But also, I mean, that's part of if you knew you were going to wear that lav, I mean, I personally would wear a button up because then I know worst case, I can put it just under frame if I really don't want to see it. And really, if I was wearing something dark, it's probably not really going to show.
Yeah, I mean, right where you're pointing to, let me switch back to my podcast mic. So right where you were pointing to was a great position to put a lav.
So it's right now I'm pointing in between my I guess that's second and third button on my collared shirt.
Yeah, that's exactly where I would recommend to clip your microphone if you were to go down this road. The collar or the button down shirts are definitely the easiest thing to do. With this shirt, technically the collar is a little bit too high, but we're okay with that here. The goal is to be able to understand what you're saying. So to just, come up, throw a microphone on quick to the top of my shirt, it's going to sound good. If you want to take the extra step, there are tons of tools out there now to help you hide the microphones under your shirt. If you happen to have if you happen to be wearing a really nice cocktail dress, because for some reason you need to present that way on camera, there are different tools and straps and things that will allow you to hide that microphone under your dress, under whatever you're wearing, really, and help you sound good. What we mean by clothing noise, let me switch. So I'm going to switch back to this. And a lot of times what happens is, you'll go to put a microphone under somebody's shirt. And if this is my optimal placement, you'll start to get this clothing rub when people move. And I used to have nightmares about this sound.
On shoots, if the sound ended up having that?
Yeah, because when I started working, my whole job was to hide these microphones on the actors. And if they didn't sound good, if they fell off, if there was too much clothing noise, it was my job to go figure out how to fix it. And I spent 6 months on a mountain doing, 15, 16 of these a day. And it was so exhausting just to constantly be fighting clothing noise, because another thing that happens with these microphones too is if you put too much, if I do several layers of cloth over it, you really start to lose the high end of my voice, and that's not something you want on movie sets or commercials.
No, totally. So, dude, I have so much to kind of change, and I'm actually excited to get back in my office and set things up. I don't know if there's anything we didn't touch on before I let you go audio wise, but I mean, my biggest takeaway, correct me if I'm wrong, is really just using what I have now and getting that mic placement optimal, and just plug in headphones and take the time, which doesn't seem like it took us that long to get there. Find that spot, and then I'll start creating what I'm creating, and then from there I can kind of see where I'm lacking or what pieces might be nice to add.
Right, exactly. Like, I don't want anybody to walk away from this feeling like they have to go buy something. If you have a microphone and the ability to get that microphone into your computer, that's it. That's what you need. After that, it comes down to placement. If you're in a room with like a bunch of like a refrigerator, maybe shut the refrigerator off for the duration of your call. Maybe run your air conditioner for an hour before your call so that you can leave it off during, things like that. The last tip that I want to give for sounding good on camera is to warm up before you go on camera. I have a buddy who will call me about a half hour before he has any business call and just talk. He gets his brain working, he gets his voice going. I made sure to have some conversations before I came over here today, just so that the first time I spoke wasn't on camera, because you got to get the brain going, you got to get the tongue warmed up. So that's something that anybody can do. It doesn't cost anything. You just, spend 15 minutes talking before you go on camera, and it'll make a big difference.
Dude, that's a great idea. I'm gonna start doing that. And even if I can't find someone to call, if you don't answer, that means I will just record, maybe even just record myself doing stuff or practicing intros or talking about something else. Yeah, that's a great idea. I never thought of that.
Yeah, and recording yourself is a great way to learn how to sound better. I have learned how to be comfortable with my own voice because I've spent so long listening to myself through a set of headphones.
That's a good point. Yeah, because it is funny. Even I've done a podcast before, those that haven't listened in the commercial world, and especially even coming back and starting this up again, the first couple times I was just like, oh man, I don't like the way. Then eventually you just get used to it, and it's not so personal, I guess, is what happens.
Right, exactly. Everybody goes through that. Is that what I sound like at some point in their life?
So if people are curious to see, your chance to plug and stuff, I think you're mostly active on Instagram and stuff. Where can people find you online that want to connect and maybe learn more about some of the audio stuff?
So my website is audio412.com. My Instagram is also just at audio412. I'm probably the most active on there. I try to answer every DM. So if you want to reach out to me directly, that's probably the best place to do it right now. And it's just a fun way to keep track of like what I'm doing. I have a whole bunch of equipment that I take to work that we didn't get to show off here today because it's not for web broadcast. It's for live dialogue capture, so I wouldn't want to go into any of that. But yeah, I do all kinds of sound recording around the city, different neighboring states, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, and I would appreciate any follows,
No, dude, totally. Yeah, and anyone even that are in a company that has content and you're creating content, maybe you are traveling to different events and stuff, that kind of equipment Kyle definitely deals with. So if you have any questions with that of recording sound in the field, he is definitely the person to hit up. But Kyle, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. That was great.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rob.
Thanks for checking out On Camera, On Brand. This episode is produced by Motion, a podcast agency that helps B2B organizations create their own shows. If you enjoyed what you learned, check out more episodes at motionagency.io/oncameraonbrand.